what's up you guys, the Curious Owl here, and today I'm going to share with you guys my December wrap-up. So December was not my best reading month by far this entire year. However, it was a little stressful for me. As many of you guys know, I graduated from college and the first couple weeks of December were dedicated for finals, and I wasn't able to do much reading other than listening to my audiobook. And then after I got done with college, the last couple weeks have been really just me trying to relax and decompress from things like that and trying to find a job. And so I've really been trying to make it a priority recently, especially, that while reading is something I love doing, it should be more focused as a self-care tool and not become something that is completely obligatory. While it's good for me to try to set goals every day for reading, I found that more often than not, they're just a little more harmful for me, mostly because I feel like it becomes a chore, and I don't want the experience of reading to feel like a chore for me. So that's just kind of been my mindset recently. Today, the day I'm recording this is December 30th, so I do technically still have a full day of reading, but I know that I'm probably not going to do a lot of that because unfortunately, the day that I'm filming this, I had to go to a visitation for a family member that passed away not suddenly exactly, but they passed away a few days ago, and the 31st is unfortunately the funeral. So I do not have the ability to do a lot of reading tomorrow because there's going to be a lot of time spent with family and other things. So that is why I am filming it today, and I'm going to give all of the stats that I'm going to have for the month now because I know tomorrow is not going to have a lot of reading involved in the entirety of the day. So for December, I ended up reading 2 books. I basically had about 506 pages read over the course of the month, and I listened to about 1,886 minutes. It's actually, I think, like 31 hours and 26 minutes, like almost 31 and a half hours, I think is what that equates to. Of the books that I read, one of them was borrowed from the library and was an audiobook, and the other was a book that was of my own. I purchased it and it was an ebook. I read no physical books, no books were sent to me this month, and those were the only ones I read throughout the entirety of the month. There is one that I am still working on that is also a personal copy and is a physical book, but I have not finished it as of yet. So the first book that I finished in December was the audiobook for The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, which is probably one of my most favorite audiobooks of the year. It is one that is really contending hard with An Ember in the Ashes and When Dimple Met Rishi. It is one I think is so vastly different. I realized this book is actually a lot older than I thought it was originally. I thought that this book came out in like 2016, 2017, but the book actually I think came out in 2013, and I didn't know much about it at all. All I knew was that it had something to do with this painting called The Goldfinch, and boy was I in for a ride with this book. It is incredibly emotionally gripping. The story follows the character of Theo Decker, who essentially is pretty much writing his autobiography, if you will. This is kind of like the autobiography of a character. And the story goes that when he's about 13 years old, he and his mother are unfortunately caught in a tragic accident where a couple of sets of bombs are blown up in this museum in New York City. And unfortunately, Theo's mother is killed in the bombing. Theo still remains alive, and when he is going through the wreckage and trying to find his mom, he meets this man who tells him to take this painting called The Goldfinch and protect it with his life. There's nothing clear as to why he needs to protect it, why it is so important, but he decides to take it, and essentially throughout his life is, in a way, a criminal because of the fact he has stolen a really incredibly important painting. The majority of this story is essentially the retelling of Theo's life about everything after this accident where his mother was killed, because it goes through his meeting this man that owns kind of like an antique store and getting to know him, and this young girl who was the half-sister to the man that he met in the museum, and then also having to move away to Las Vegas with his father, who has not really been a part of his life for the last year. His father had up and left their family and has started a new life, but he has to move out there for several years and makes friends. One in particular who I think is honestly one of the most interesting characters I've ever met. I think that the friend that he makes in Las Vegas that continues to be his friend throughout much of his life is just such a complex and interesting character that I was gripped to the entire story. And then it goes into also Theo's adult life when he goes back to New York City to live his life as an adult and starts working in the antique shop with the friend that he met through The Man at the Museum. When I put it that way, it's a little confusing, but if you listen to the book and you read it, it's actually a pretty linear story. It is essentially this character's autobiography, and that's, I think, the kind of mindset you need to go into when looking at this, because the beginning of the story I thought was a little unclear. Like, I wasn't sure what exactly was going on until he started talking about the accident, and then going from there, talking about everything that happened afterward. And it's really hard because much of this character's life is dealt with drugs. So there is a huge drug abuse and alcohol abuse trigger warning for this novel, as well as trigger warnings, obviously, for mass bombings and things of that nature, where massive amounts of people are hurt in these catastrophic accidents. So it's a very hard novel to go through, and you really see that Theo throughout the entirety of the story is slowly losing his grip with reality, and it pretty much all stems from the fact that he is grieving because of the loss of his mother. And I think that that's really the biggest takeaway from this story, is that grief does some really awful things to people, and honestly, Theo is like the prime example of what grief can do to a person because of the things that he exhibits, the behavior he exhibits over the course of his entire life after leaving New York City. It was incredibly amazing. I felt that the characters that were all involved with the story all had a really strong purpose and were very complex and interesting. And there was a plot twist that happened towards the end of the novel that I was so shocked by. I did not expect this to have any kind of plot twist whatsoever. But just like how life can be incredibly unpredictable for us in reality, the life of Theo Decker was incredibly unpredictable as well. I loved that so much because I felt like Donna Tartt really encapsulated that so well about the unpredictability of life and how things just seem to go one way, but then all of a sudden can take a 180-degree turn and change everything for you. The one thing I will say about this that may turn some people off from The Goldfinch is that there is a lot of philosophical talk, especially towards the end of the novel, because Theo, unfortunately, as an adult, realized that he had gone through a lot as a child. And so a lot of the end of the novel is very philosophical speaking, you know, what would have happened if things hadn't gone, you know, the way they did? Would I still be the same person? Will I still have experienced the same things? And sometimes that is, you know, the crux of grief. There's this whole thing where people are so afraid of death because there's an unpredictability of what comes after, for not just the person that dies, but the people that were a part of their life. And so it's a really interesting perspective on death and grief and the effects of those who pass on, both for the person that died themselves and for the people around them. It was incredibly interesting to read. I really enjoyed it a lot, and I cannot even begin to explain how many times this novel had made me cry over the course of the entirety of the story. I think I at least cried 3 times within the last 2 hours of the novel, and I ended up giving it a 5 out of 5 stars because it is probably one of the most heart-wrenching novels I've ever been able to be exposed to, and I think is one, honestly, I would consider getting a physical copy of so that I can continue to reread it in the future, because it was just so amazing. Like, I did not expect it to be as good as it was, and I'm really impressed with how this story has made me feel. The second and final book that I read in December was the final book in the Dangerous Creatures duology, finishing off my Beautiful Creatures reread, Dangerous Deception by Kami Garcia and Margaret Stohl. Unfortunately, though, this novel was not my favorite. It honestly let me down in a lot of ways. I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars, but there were a lot of problems I had associated with this particular novel, especially the fact that I felt like it was a way too rapid conclusion for the story. And I mean that in a couple different ways. First of all, the story itself was incredibly fast-paced, and while I enjoy those to an extent, I felt like there was so much of the story missing that I would have been able to understand had the story been drawn out just a little bit more. Secondly, the ending of this story did not really help me with understanding what kind of is a tie between the end of this novel and the beginning of the prequel / continuation novellas that happen. Because I realized that at the end of this duology is where those novellas that I read in September and October began. So essentially the order goes Beautiful Creatures, Beautiful Darkness, Dream Dark, the novella between books 2 and 3, Beautiful Chaos, Beautiful Redemption, Dangerous Dream, which is a novella separated from the 4th book and the beginning of the spin-off series, Dangerous Creatures, Dangerous Deception, then the 4 prequel-esque novellas because they do incorporate information about things that happened before the 1st book, but are still continuing a story that happens after the duology of Dangerous Creatures and Dangerous Deception. A Gatlin Wedding, the final novella that is essentially the final stand for these characters, is essentially, I believe, what is the culminating factor of also the story of Lincoln Ridley. And I did not feel like the end of Dangerous Deception really made a clear tie as to how things went from the end of that book to the beginning of A Gatlin Wedding, because essentially in A Gatlin Wedding, Ridley comes in with Knox, who is a character we meet in the Dangerous Deception story and in Dangerous Creatures, and says, listen, Silas Ravenwood is going to come and kill everybody. We need to stop him, and that's where the final stand comes in. However, I don't really see where the connection is between the end of Dangerous Deception because there wasn't really enough of a satisfying conclusion to where I understood where everyone was going, nor did I understand how they got, Ridley and Knox specifically, had gotten to A Gatlin Wedding, nor known about it, nor had a reason enough to get there themselves, or exactly how the heck Silas Ravenwood even knew that there was these things going on. That may not seem like much for those of you who don't know the Beautiful Creatures series, but it's something that has really made me upset being a Beautiful Creatures fan because of the fact that I just don't understand where the line of story is. I don't see the tie between the end of this one and A Gatlin Wedding. I just don't. And I feel like that's what is really making this hard for me to really enjoy the ending of this duology, because I just don't feel like there was enough. There needed to be more to it to make the story more connected. But there you guys go. Those are the 2 books that I ended up reading in December. And like I said, I did start another one and am in the middle of it. I haven't been able to finish it as of yet, but should hopefully be able to finish it within the beginning of January. And that is Revival by Stephen King. I also still have to get through Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, which was my December TBR pick for the month, but because of how things have gone the last couple weeks, I'm not too worried. I really just want to take my time and, especially with Revival, get through it as easily as I can, because Revival is an interesting story that I'm still trying to feel out how I am with the story. I don't know whether or not I should be okay with the story or not, so I'm really trying to take my time with it and really give it the room it needs for me to think about it. So anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me in this video. Let me know down in the comments below what you read in December and what your New Year plans are, if you have any, for either reading or personal things or whatever. So let me know down there, and as always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed, please do give it a big thumbs up, and if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit the button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock, and I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!